from Unit 1 to Unit 11. Today we shall start from Unit 12. From Unit 12 to last Unit 15. These units will be covered today, and we shall study first the Unit 12, Alexis de Tocqueville, the political thought of the most pioneered political philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville. You know, in the history of Western political thought, Alexis de Tocqueville holds a prominent position, and his contribution is far-reaching to the students of political science. Tocqueville was a political philosopher of the great civilized European nation France. He was a French philosopher. He was considered an imaginative political philosopher. He is also regarded a sociologist, a historian, philosopher of 19th century particularly. You know, Tocqueville was a very imaginative political philosopher who had his work, who had his work, namely democracy in America. His work, ତାଙ୍କ ପୁସ୍ତକର ନାମ ହେଉଛି The Democracy in America. It is of two volumes. It is of two volumes. Tocqueville, according to J.S. Mill, was the first to write about democracy and its actual functioning in the belief that it could become a viable political system. I had already told you that Alexis de Tocqueville is an aristocrat by birth. He became liberal while studying and writing about American democracy. He has focuses upon the functioning of American democracy, and he has compared it with the French system of administration. He considered freedom or liberty as the core of every political value, which stood threatened by the lethal combination of political democracy and social equality. Tocqueville was concerned with the future of democratic society and was conscious of the tumultuous social changes. Tumultuous means the unrest social changes that his times produced and the impact it had. He understood democracy as an unstoppable arc towards equality in all its dimensions, legal, be it political, be it social, and economic also. Tocqueville analyzed the American federal constitution. He had visited America to analyze the political institutions, the political process of American federal structure and constitution, along with his friend Gustave de Beaumont. on the year 1802, and there we could find the depth of democracy, the nature of democracy, the method of democracy working in America and its different values. And he compared these with the other institutions of different countries, particularly with France, his native country, France. Tocqueville reflected people's desire for equality and its intricate relationship with individual liberty and democracy. Tocqueville is the champion of human freedom and or liberal liberty, human freedom and liberty. He always in favor of the maximum liberty and freedom to the individual by the state authority. He questions the question of people's sovereignty, the role of constitution, and the tyranny of majority was the factors he had focused in his work. Tocqueville reflected people's desire for equality and its intricate relationship with individual liberty and democracy. He stressed on the importance of local self-government, local self-government, decentralized administration, widespread ownership of property, and voluntary associations for maintenance of political liberties, stability of government, and of protection against the tyranny of the majority. You know, Tocqueville was the first ever political philosopher to write particularly about democracy and its actual functioning, in the belief that it could become a viable political system. Through democracy, there can be a viable pro-people political system. He had a vision on democracy, he had a vision on revolution, and he had a vision of the modern state also. Tocqueville understood democracy to mean not only increased political participation, but also civic and social equality. According to Tocqueville, democracy is a process, is a system of administration where there is a wider scope for the people to participate in the process of administration, process of election. It is also a scope, democracy is also a scope for civic and social equality. Democracy provides an opportunity for the people to have civic and social equality. Tocqueville, regarding revolution, he dislikes it still. He offered a balanced view. He considered that while one great revolution may establish liberty in a country, several revolutions in succession make orderly liberty impossible there for a long time. in his book, he had mentioned revolution, and he never denounces revolution, but he has opined for a limited activity of revolution against state authorities. Widespread revolution. He is a critic of French Revolution, but he concedes the values of French Revolution: liberty, equality, fraternity. These are the human values. These are the democratic values which a system should provide for its people. But there should be revolution, but it should be used for a limited purpose, particularly to safeguard, particularly to safeguard the human values like liberty, equality, and fraternity of the people. Regarding state, Tocqueville is of the view that the role of the state is one. The role of the state as one that would unify all special interests of the various social classes into a whole body politic. The state has the responsibility, the state has the duty, the state activity always works for the unity and integrity of different social classes residing in that state, and the entire state is converted into a body, a single body politic by the state. His insights into the economic foundations of the modern state enabled him to brilliantly analyze the character of the absolutist state. That regarding state, Tocqueville took note of the widespread respect for the rule of law in America, whereas in France, arbitrary rule had only encouraged contempt for the law. In America and England, local self-governing institutions were strong, whereas in France, the sale of municipal offices by the crown had weakened the tradition. As a sociologist, Tocqueville took interest in the ethos of society and pointed to the contractual nature of modern relationships without any moral obligations or human affections. Tocqueville understood the role of the state as one that would unify all special interests of the various social classes into a whole body politic. Tocqueville was also cautious about the spread of democracy. He understood democracy to mean not only increased political participation but also civic and social equality. So that Tocqueville's vision regarding democracy, regarding revolution, regarding state is quite distinct. Tocqueville defined liberty as absence of external political restrictions. It means that Tocqueville is in favor of unbridled liberty of human being. No state can impose any restriction on the human liberty so far as it is beneficial to the society. His, his political ideal was freedom under the rule of law. His liberty is under the rule of law. He was insistent that people ought to have, as far as practicable, direct control over their own affairs. Though it should be with certain limitations. The vibrant local government and free associations are also the liberties of human beings. It is something, his liberty was something different from decentralization under feudalism. By tyranny of the majority in America, Tocqueville did not believe like James Madison. He always favors it. Tocqueville, like Montesquieu, considered commerce as the inevitable and appropriate development of growing social equality and individual freedom. However, he could also perceive the destructive side of unrestrained materialism and the hazards of excessive economic inequality. He pointed to the twin dangers of relationship between democracy and equality that would result in tyranny of the majority. Tyranny of the majority, he was always against the tyranny of the majority. And regarding religion, Tocqueville considered religion as a political institution. He favors religion. He favors the religious laws and never denounces religion like Niccolo Machiavelli. Tocqueville considered religion as a political institution and vital to the preservation of freedom in a democratic society, particularly from the despotic tendencies that equality of conditions is unleashed. Tocqueville's vision lies in recognizing the extraordinary importance of religion, which plays in strengthening democracy in America. He considered religion as a political institution. Democracy, because of equality of conditions, needed moral lies and hence needed religion. Democracy always needs religion. He pointed to the utility of religion rather than the truth of anyone religion. This extraordinary emphasis on religion by Tocqueville is noted to be crucial to establishing democracy in France and other Christian states of Europe. He concluded that due to the variance between the spirit of religion and the spirit of the freedom, democracy failed in Europe. The alliance between the Catholic Church and the French monarchy, although injurious to religion in itself, was characteristic of a more calamitous alliance between Christianity and the moribund aristocracy. So, historically, Tocqueville's democracy began when Jesus unequivocally proclaimed universal human equality making the realization of democracy possible. Furthermore, the Christian teaching that was important for a democratic society was the doctrine of the immortality of the soul. Religion taught human beings to strive for external happiness by resisting the selfish passions of the hour, and thus democratic individuals would learn that only through persistence and hard work something permanent could be attained in both private and public spheres. They acquired the art of managing their life, and it is by far his vision regarding individual liberty or freedom. Tocqueville always says that the consolidation of vested religious interests, in particular political parties and groups, as has happened in Europe, are harmonious coexistence of religion and democracy. Democracy facilitates, according to him, democracy facilitates the spread of religion by guaranteeing the right of religious beliefs. All religious faiths gained by political liberty, and consequently religion also supports the separation of state and church. Besides, secondly, besides religion as an important factor conducive for democracy in America was equality of conditions. Interestingly, this attribute by itself did not lead to freedom and was compatible with a new kind of despotism made possible by the forces of individualism and materialism that democracy unleashed. Religion emerged as the savior of democracy by checking this degeneration. Tocqueville considered that religion might not be able to contain the entire urge of individualism and the pursuit of well-being, but was the only mechanism of modern moderation and education. He saw religion sustaining moderate individualism with a drive for material prosperity, both of which are essential for the success of democracy. Instead of seeing religion as an antithesis of human liberation, as Karl Heinrich Marx did, Tocqueville felt a happy blending of democracy and religion was possible and desirable. And he was categorical that democracy did not rest on either constitutional arrangements or laws, but on mores of society, which embraces both habits and opinions made possible by the religion, for it inculcated moral habits with respect for all human beings. A successful political democracy has to be grounded on moral institutions, he says, which means religious faith, the dynamics of the democratic process, and its interaction with society at large minimizes theological considerations and the otherworldly attitude that religion fosters. The adaptation to democratic life means religion would have to accept the philosophies of well-being and prosperity. In return, Religion purifies and regulates by emphasizing honest means to reach these ends. The greatest advantage of religion is moderation and self-control. The fine balance of democracy and religion and its uninterpreted success in America contrasted with stark failure of irreligious communism gives credence to Tocqueville's analysis. His views regarding women and family, Tocqueville attacked the institution of arranged marriages, for it encouraged loose sexual morals, thereby undermining personal freedom. Personal freedom. He is critical of the French Revolution, which might have democratized the country's political life, but failed to create a culture of freedom. Tocqueville observed that American women, despite their lack of formal political power, were able to contribute to America's freedom and prosperity because of the dignity and freedom in their personal lives. He, in America, there was no adultery or crimes against women. In the 1830s, women could fearlessly undertake long journeys alone. Men also adhered to the sexual morals, partly due to martial freedom and restraints imposed by an articulate public opinion, and partly due to their ambition to pursue wealth, making them practical, non-erotic, and busy. Tocqueville regarded prostitution as a regrettable but wise concession, keeping in mind the lust of the male. An analysis, an analysis of writings of Tocqueville does not allow scholars to simply conclude that he was an aristocratic reactionary, as mentioned in Curtis 1961. Labeled him as an aristocratic conservative, while Kirk 1960 regarded him as a liberal conservative in the same tradition as Edmund Burke. In Tocqueville's writings, one finds both liberal and conservative dimensions. His passion for freedom and its protection and the desire to protect property rights represent the liberal tendencies. As a conservative, he was the first to caution against the dangers about too much of democracy. He focused on culture, manners, and habits of people. He also wrote on social stratification, race relations, slavery, colonialism, communities, voluntary associations, bureaucracy, armies, language, literature, art, religion, prisons, and crimes. Using the comparative method extensively in his arguments, he explained the root causes for the success of democratic institutions in America, the importance of laws over geographical circumstances, and eventually the importance of manners of over laws. So his place in the history of political philosophy, Tocqueville held a very comfortable position because he highlighted two aspects of individualism. the basis of a democratic society. These were faith in individual region as the sole basis of opinion and belief in a self-control and self-interested pursuit of one's personal ends. And he attacked the institution of arranged marriages for it encouraged loose sexual morals, thereby undermining personal freedom. So that Tocqueville is the important philosopher for the students of political science and also for the entire theory building of political science. It is all about Tocqueville's philosophy, and next we shall go for next unit, and this unit we shall study John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill. You know John Stuart Mill, the leading political philosopher on the ideology of utilitarianism after Jeremy Bentham. After Jeremy Bentham, he is the next utilitarian philosopher of the world. J.S. Mill's importance lies not only in his criticism of utilitarianism, but also in his rich contribution to liberalism by his immemorable defense of freedom of speech and individuality, and in his defense of a liberal society as a necessary precondition for a liberal state. You know, John Stuart Mill was born in London on 20th May 1806. He had 8 younger siblings. All his learning came from his father, James Stuart Mill. James Stuart Mill was a high-ranking officer in the British India government. In the British India government, John Stuart got the post after education as assistant examiner in the year 1823 and served the British government till his retirement. His father, James Stuart Mill, had taught John Stuart Mill by himself at home. His education did not include any children's book or toys, for he started to learn Greek at the age of 4 and Latin at the age of 8. By the time he was 10, he had read many of Plato's dialogues, logic, and history. He was familiar with the writings of Euripides, Homer, Polybius, Sophocles, and Thucydides. He could solve problems in algebra, geometry, differential calculus, and higher mathematics. So dominant was his father's influence that John Stuart Mill could not recollect his mother's contribution to his formative years as a child. At the age of 13, he was introduced to serious reading of English classical economists and published an introductory textbook in economics entitled Elements of Political Economy. In the year 1812, 20, 1820, at the age of 14. From the training that John Stuart Mill received at home, he was convinced that nature, more than nature, played a crucial role in formation of character. In formation of character. It also assured him of the importance of education could play in transforming human nature. In his autobiography, which he wrote in the year 1850s, he acknowledged his father's contribution in shaping his mental abilities and physical strength, to the construct that he never had normal boyhood. By the age of 20, Mill started to write for newspapers and periodicals. He contributed to every aspect of political theory. You know, Mill had composed as many as 14 books to his credit. These are a system of logic, some unsettled question of political economy, essays on liberty, considerations on representative government, utilitarianism, thoughts of parliamentary reform, subjection of women, the autobiography, and the three essays on nature, the utility of religion and theism. 9. An examination of Sir W. Hamilton's philosophy, dissertation and discussions. 10. 11. The enfranchisement of women, admission of women to electoral franchise. 13. Women's suffrage. 14. Autobiography. Out of these, essays on liberty, considerations on representative government, utilitarianism are considered most important for the students of political science, and his political philosophy is known from these works. His views: equal rights for women. Mill wrote, there are many persons for whom it is not enough that the inequality has no just or legitimate defense. They require to be told that express advantage would be obtained by abolishing it. The question was, would society benefit if women were granted equal rights? Answering in the affirmative, Mill detailed 4 social benefits of women's equality. That means John Stuart Mill was in favor of women's equality. The subjection of women begins with the revolutionary statement, the principle which regulates the existing social relations between the two sexes. The legal subordination of one sex to the other is wrong in itself, says Mill. Mill found paradoxical was that in the modern age, when in other areas the principle of the principles of liberty and equality were being asserted. They were yet not applied to the condition of women. No one believed in slavery anymore. Yet women were sometimes treated worse than slaves, and this was accepted as beyond questioning. Mill wanted to explain this resistance to women's equality in the context of a general acceptance of the principles of equality and liberty. He, his argument for women's equality is that Mill refuted was that since historically it has been a universal practice, therefore there must be some justification for it. Contra this, Mill showed that other so-called universal social practices like slavery, for example, had been rejected. So perhaps, given time, women's inequality would also become unacceptable. Mill also said that from the existence of something, one could argue for the rightness of that thing. Only the alternative has been tried, and in the case of women, living with them on equal terms had never been done. The second argument for women's inequality was based on women's nature. Women were said to be naturally inferior to men. Traditionally, it is said that women were inferior to men naturally. Mill's response was that one could not make arguments about women's inequality based on natural differences because these differences were a result of socialization. Mill disapproves women's inequality on the ground of naturality. Mill was generally against the human nature as a ground for any claim, since he believed that human nature changed according to the social environment. At the same time, Mill also pointed out that in spite of being treated so differently from men, many women throughout history had shown an extraordinary aptitude for political leadership. The third argument is that Mill says that there is nothing wrong with women's subordination because women accept it voluntarily. Mill pointed out that this claim was empirically wrong. Many women had written tracts against women's inequality, and hundreds of women were already demonstrating in the streets of London for women's suffrage. Since women had the choice but to live with their husbands, they were afraid that their complaints about their position would only lead to worse treatment from them. And fourthly, Mill also claimed that since all women were brought up from childhood to believe that their ideal character is the very opposite to that of men, not self-will, the government by self-control, but submission and yielding to the control of others. What was not to be remarked was that some women accepted this subordination willingly, but that so many women resisted it. Mill argues that for a family to function well, one decision maker is needed, and the husband is best suited to be this decision maker. That does not mean women is unfit for any such decision. The husband and wife being both adults, there was no reason why the husband should take all decisions. women should have a part of it. He refuted all of these four arguments for women's inequality. So, Mill's ideal was improvement. He wanted individuals to constantly better themselves morally, mentally, and materially. Regarding women's equality, Mill points out that doubling of the mass of mental faculties available to society, not only society will not only benefit, there should be more doctors, engineers, teachers and scientists. All additional advantage would be that men in the profession should perform better because of competition from their female colleagues. If there is women enjoying equality will have a better influence on mankind. Women enjoying equality will have a better influence on mankind. Under relations of subordination, women assert their wills only in all sorts of perverse ways. With equality, they will no longer need to do this. Lastly, speaking in favor of women equality, he says that giving women equal rights, their happiness would be increased manifold, and this would satisfy. Mill argued that the utilitarian principle of the greatest happiness of the greatest number, greatest happiness of the greatest number can be achieved thereby. The importance of individual liberty. John Stuart Mill says in his work on liberty published in the year 1859, he says civil liberties are under greater threat in democratic than in despotic regimes. In the absolutist states of earlier times, the ruler's interest was seen as opposed to that of the subjects, who were especially vigilant against any encroachment on their existing freedoms. In modern democracies, based on the principle of self-government, the people feel less under threat from their own government. Mill tells that this laxity, and said that individuals needed to be more vigilant about the danger to that liberty, not only from the government but also from social morality and custom. His famous version, internal vigilance is the price of liberty. Internal vigilance is the price of liberty, is the basic principle, basic vision he has displayed in his writing. Mill clarified and detailed his position on liberty by defending three specific liberties: the liberty of thought and expression, including the liberty of speaking and publishing, the liberty of action, and that of association. Also, Mill's argument is there in each of these liberty. Liberty of thought and expression. Regarding liberty of thought and expression, Mill says that if all mankind minus one were of one opinion and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would be more justified in silencing that one person than he if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. Mill provided 4 reasons for his freedom of expression. Firstly, the dominant ideas of a society usually emanate from the class interests of that society's ascendant class. The majority opinion may be quite far from the truth or from the social interest. It is more than likely that the suppressed majority opinion is true, and those suppressing it will only prevent or at least delay mankind from the knowing the truth. Human beings are fallible creatures, and they are certainly that the opinion they hold is true is justified only when their opinion is constantly opposed to contrary opinions. Mill wanted us to give up the assumption of infallibility when our certainty about our beliefs makes us cruise all contrary points of view so that our opinion is not subject to criticism. ବ୍ୟକ୍ତିବାଦ ଇଣ୍ଡିଭିଜୁଆଲିଜିମ୍ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତିବାଦ ତତ୍ତ୍ୱର ପ୍ରମୁଖ ପ୍ରବକ୍ତା ହେଉଛନ୍ତି ଜନ୍ ଷ୍ଟୁଆର୍ଟ ମିଲ୍। ତାଙ୍କ ମତରେ ଗଣତନ୍ତ୍ର ବା ଡେମୋକ୍ରାସି, ଜନମତ ବା ପବ୍ଲିକ ଓପିନିଅନ, ସାମୂହିକବାଦ ବା କଲେକ୍ଟିଭିଜିମ୍ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତି ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ପ୍ରତି ବିପଦ ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରୁଥିବାରୁ ସେମାନେ ନିଜ ନିଜ ପରିସରରେ କାର୍ଯ୍ୟ କରିବା ଉଚିତ। ତାଙ୍କ ପୁସ୍ତକ ଏସେଜ୍ ଅନ୍ ଲିବର୍ଟିରେ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତି ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ସମ୍ପର୍କରେ ବିଶଦ ଭାବରେ ଆଲୋଚନା କରିଛନ୍ତି। ତାଙ୍କ ମତରେ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତିର ନୈତିକ ଅଭିବୃଦ୍ଧି ଓ ବିକାଶ ପାଇଁ ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ଏକ ଅପରିହାର୍ଯ୍ୟ ଆବଶ୍ୟକତା। ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ବ୍ୟକ୍ତିର ବିକାଶ ନିମନ୍ତେ ଏକାନ୍ତ କାମ୍ୟ। ତାଙ୍କ ମତରେ ଓଭର ହିମସେଲ୍ଫ, ହିଜ୍ ବଡି and mind, individual is sovereign। ଅର୍ଥାତ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତିର ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତାର ଅଧିକାରକୁ ଜନ୍ ଷ୍ଟୁଆର୍ଟ ମିଲ୍ ନିରଙ୍କୁଶ ବୋଲି କହିଛନ୍ତି। ନିରଙ୍କୁଶ, without any restrictions। There are two types of actions of a human being: self regarding action, another is other regarding action। ଅର୍ଥାତ ନିଜର ଦେହ ମନ ଓ ନିଜ ଉପରେ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତି ସମ୍ପୂର୍ଣ୍ଣ ଭାବରେ ସାର୍ବଭୌମ। ନିଜ ଦେହ ମନ ଏବଂ ନିଜ ଉପରେ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତି ସମ୍ପୂର୍ଣ୍ଣ ଭାବରେ ସାର୍ବଭୌମ। ଓଭର ହିମସେଲ୍ଫ, ହିଜ୍ ବଡି ଆଣ୍ଡ ମାଇଣ୍ଡ, ଇଣ୍ଡିଭିଜୁଆଲ ଇଜ ଅଲୱେଜ ସଭରେନ୍। ସେଥିପାଇଁ ସେ ମତ ପୋଷଣ କରିଛନ୍ତି there should be restrictions on liberty। His views on liberty is that liberty should not be unrestrained। Liberty should not be unrestrained। There should be reasonable restriction। There should be reasonable restriction on the individual liberty। ଯେଉଁ କାର୍ଯ୍ୟ ମନୁଷ୍ୟର ଯେଉଁ କାର୍ଯ୍ୟ ଅନ୍ୟର କ୍ଷତି ସାଧନ କରେ ସେ କାର୍ଯ୍ୟ କରିବାର ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ଉପରେ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ହସ୍ତକ୍ଷେପ କରିପାରିବ, ନିୟନ୍ତ୍ରଣ ଜାରି କରିପାରିବ। There should be reasonable restrictions। So ଜନ୍ ଷ୍ଟୁଆର୍ଟ ମିଲ୍ ରାଇଟ୍ ଟୁ ଫ୍ରିଡମ ଅଫ ଏକ୍ସପ୍ରେସନ କୁ ଆବସୋଲ୍ୟୁଟ ବୋଲି କହିଛନ୍ତି। ସେଭଳି there should be necessity of freedom, freedom of representatives, individual liberty। ଜନ୍ ଷ୍ଟୁଆର୍ଟ ମିଲ୍ ଇଣ୍ଡିଭିଜୁଆଲ ଲିବର୍ଟି ଏବଂ ଇଣ୍ଡିଭିଜୁଆଲ ରାଇଟ୍ ର ଜଣେ ପ୍ରୋମିନେଣ୍ଟ ଏକ୍ସପୋନେଣ୍ଟ। इंडिविजुअलिज्म मतरे मनुष्य निजर भल चाहे से एक स्वाधीन तथा अनुकूल सामाजिक और राष्ट्रीय परिवेश सर्वदा आवश्यक करे से राष्ट्र मनुष्य सर्वदा एक अनुकूल परिवेश सृष्टि करने उचित जो व्यक्ति निजर स्वाधीनता को संपूर्ण भाव में उपभोग कर पारिबा। His views on representative government. Mill's views on representative government. Mill began his representative government by stating that we can only decide which is the best form of government by examining which form of government fulfills most adequately the purposes of government. Representative government must use the existing qualities and skills of the citizens to best serve their interests. And it must improve the moral, intellectual, and active qualities of these citizens. A despotic government may be able to fulfill the first purpose, but will fail in the second. Only a representative government is able, only a representative government is able to fulfill these two functions. These two functions. It is a representative government. It is a representative government that combines judiciously the two principles of participation and competence, which is able to fulfill the two functions of protecting and educating citizens. जॉन स्टुअर्ट मिल राष्ट्र एवं सरकार आवश्यकता को अनुभव करी यार गठनर परिपाटी अपेक्षा कार्यकारिता उपरे विशेष गुरुत्व आरोप कर मतरे पॉलिटिकल इंस्टीट्यूशन गुड़िक लोकंकर स्वेच्छाकृत उद्यम प्रतिष्ठा होई सेमानक पई कार्य करी थाए। राष्ट्रर हस्तक्षेप व्यक्तिर कार्यकलाप आवश्यक हेले मध्य यार सीमा संपर्क से सतर्क कर देयर शुड बी ए लिमिट। राष्ट्रर सेवा पाई उत्तम गुणधारी ज्ञानी गुणी व्यक्ति को स्थान देले बा सेमाने अंशग्रहण करने आगे आसबार सुजोग सृष्टि कले प्रकृत गणतंत्र प्रतिष्ठा होई पारिबो बोली जॉन स्टुअर्ट मिल तांकर मत पोषण कर प्रतिनिधिमूलक शासन व्यवस्था उपर प्रतिनिधित्व सरकार को गुरुत्व दे एक माध्यम जहा द्वारा शासन व्यवस्था रे विकास साधन हुए एवं जनसाधारण आवश्यक अभिमुखी हुए। तेणु वेपर तांको अनिच्छाकृत गणतंत्रवादी बोली रेलुक्टेंट डेमोक्रेट बोली अभिहित करछन्ती। सीएल प्रोफेसर सीएल वेपर looks him as a reluctant democrat. Beyond utilitarianism, उपयोगिता बाद उपरे जॉन स्टुअर्ट मिलकर मत संपूर्ण भाव में गुरुत्वपूर्ण। विशिष्ट दार्शनिक मिलकर गुरु होचंती जेरेमी बेंथाम। You know that Jeremy Bentham is regarded as the first ever utilitarian political philosopher in the world. He is the teacher of John Stuart Mill. And John Stuart Mill grew up in the shadow of utilitarianism, and even after his emotional crisis in his early 20s, he managed to write a defense of utilitarianism. Throughout his work, it can be found that applying the standard of utility and justifies the means. गोटिए कार्यर गोटिए गणतांत्रिक अनुष्ठानर बा गोटिए गणतांत्रिक प्रक्रियार मूल्य सेतिकी बेले बुझा पड़े जहार कार्य जन उपयोगी होता है. यूटिलिटी इज द justification of the institution or process. One consideration for giving quality to women was that it would increase their happiness, pleasure and pain. The principle of liberty was defended on the grounds of its social utility. Social progress depended on individual freedom. A modified liberal democracy was characterized as the best form of government because of its usefulness or utility it has with. You know, John Stuart Mill has made a significant change of Bentham's theory of utilitarianism. Pleasure is to be counted not only in terms of quantity but also in terms of quality. A qualitatively higher pleasure is count for more than lower pleasures. It is quite compatible with the principle of utility to recognize the fact that some kinds of pleasure are more desirable and more valuable than others. So that बेंथाम को प्रदर्शित आनंद एवं जंत्रणा प्लीजर एंड पेन तत्व से किछिटा परिवर्तन आनिथिले. आनंदर अर्थ सुख और जंत्रणार अनुपस्थिति, जंत्रणार अर्थ असुख और आनंदर प्रतिरोध करिवा. तेणु बेंथामकर एही तत्व से परिवर्तन आनी गुणात्मक क्वालिटेटिव प्लीजर उपरे इंपोर्टेंस देथिले. सेहीपरि सॉक्रेटिस मिल कहते जे मनीष होई असंतोष रहिबा बरं भल किंतु घुसुरी होई खुशी रे रहिबा उचित नुहे. सेहीपरि सॉक्रेटिस भली ज्ञानी होई असंतोष रे रहिबा बरं भल किंतु बोका होई संतोष वा खुशी रे रहिबा उचित नुहे. इट इज बेटर टू बी ह्यूमन बीइंग्स dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better Socrates dissatisfied than fool satisfied. He made utilitarianism at once more human and less consistent. मिल को उपयोगितावाद नीति को अधिक मानविक एवं कम श्रृंखलित से सेथिपाई करिसंती. जॉन स्टुअर्ट मिल क्वालिटेटिव एंड क्वांटिटेटिव प्लीजर भितर डिफरेंशिएट करचंती ए भली भाबरे. इंडिविजुअल प्लीजर कलेक्टिव प्लीजर भितर डिफरेंशिएशन करचंती. गुड लाइफ प्लीजर लाइफ भितर डिफरेंशिएशन करचंती. सेल्फ इंटरेस्ट जनरल हैप्पीनेस भितर करचंती. मिल्स कांसेप्ट ऑफ लिबर्टी मिलकर स्वतंत्रता लिबर्टी संपर्क धारणा जेरेमी बेंथाम को धारणा ठारू भिन्न. गणतांत्रिक चिंताधारा ओपन बैलेट सिस्टम को ग्रहण करचंती. बेंथाम कर सीक्रेट बैलेट को से रिजेक्ट करचंती. सो Mill's liberalism provided the first major framework of modern democratic equality by extending the logic of the defense of liberty to end the subjection of women. He was a member of parliament. As a member of parliament, he tried to push through a law allowing women to vote, women franchise, and was disappointed when it did not happen. It might be opposite here to cite his characterization in his autobiography, his away from democracy and towards socialism. He says in his autobiography, I was a Democrat, but not least of a socialist. We were now much less democratic than I had been, but our ideal of ultimate improvement went far beyond democracy and would class us decidedly under the general designation of socialists. So, Mill's position in the history of political philosophy holds a special place. Mill ବ୍ୟକ୍ତି ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତାର ଯେଉଁ ଗୁଣାତ୍ମକ ଚିତ୍ର ବର୍ଣ୍ଣନା କରିଛନ୍ତି ତାଙ୍କୁ ତାଙ୍କର ରାଜନୈତିକ ବିଜ୍ଞାନକୁ ତାଙ୍କର ଅବଦାନ କହିଲେ କିଛି ଭୁଲ ହବନି। ତେଣୁ ଜନ୍ ଷ୍ଟୁଆର୍ଟ ମିଲ୍ ଜଣେ ୟୁଟିଲିଟେରିଆନ ଭାବରେ ଜଣେ ପ୍ରଖ୍ୟାତ ରାଜନୈତିକ ଦାର୍ଶନିକ ଭାବେ ପଲିଟିକାଲ ଫିଲୋସଫିରେ ଆଜିର ଦିନରେ ବି ଗଣା ଯାଆନ୍ତି। It is all about John Stuart Mill. Then we shall go for unit 14, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, a German philosopher, a German philosopher. Regarding him, the significance of political philosophy, the significance of political philosophy of Hegel centered around 2 points, centered around 2 points, and those were the dialectic method and the idealization of nation state. These 2 points became the source of later political theories of fascism and state absolutism, says Professor Sahoo. ହିଗେଲଙ୍କର ରାଜନୈତିକ ଦର୍ଶନରେ ଦୁଇ ମୁଖ୍ୟ ପ୍ରାଥମିକ ଉପାଦାନ ରହିଛି। ସେଥିମଧ୍ୟରୁ ଗୁରୁତ୍ୱପୂର୍ଣ୍ଣ ହେଉଛି ଦ୍ୱନ୍ଦ୍ୱାତ୍ମକ କ୍ଷମତା। ଅନ୍ୟଟି ହେଉଛି ଅନ୍ୟ ଉପାଦାନ ହେଉଛି ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର। ଏହି ଦୁଇଟି ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ପର୍ଯ୍ୟାୟରେ ଫାସିବାଦ ଏବଂ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ନିରଙ୍କୁଶବାଦ ଷ୍ଟେଟ୍ ଆବସଲ୍ୟୁଟିଜିମ୍ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ପାଇଁ ଦାୟୀ ବୋଲି ପ୍ରଫେସର ସାବାଇନ ମତ ପୋଷଣ କରନ୍ତି। Hegel was the champion of German idealism. He was a German philosopher born on 1770 AD and breathed his last on 1831 AD. He was the champion of German idealism. Hegel studied theology because his father wanted him to become a clergyman. He got degree of Doctor of Philosophy from the University of Tübingen. Thereafter, he became a tutor at Bonn and Frankfurt and worked as such for about 7 years. In 1801, he got a job as a lecturer at the University of Jena and after became a professor. In 1816, he was appointed professor of philosophy at the University of Heidelberg, and in 1818 he became a professor of philosophy at the Berlin University. This position was held till then by the renowned German philosopher Fichte. Along with his assignment, Hegel also worked the official advisor of Emperor of Prussia, Germany. He held these two positions till his death in 1831. Hegel wrote extensively on various aspects of political philosophy. Various aspects of political philosophy. Hegelଙ୍କର young age French Revolution ସମୟରେ ଅତିବାହିତ ହୋଇଥିବାରୁ ତାଙ୍କ ମାନସିକ ଚିନ୍ତନର ଗୌରବମୟ ସେହି ସମୟରୁ ହିଁ ଆରମ୍ଭ ହୋଇଥିଲା। ତେଣୁ ଏହି ବିପ୍ଳବ ତାଙ୍କ ଭାବ ରାଜ୍ୟରେ ଥିବା ରକ୍ଷଣଶୀଳତା ବା କନଜରଭେଟିଭର ପ୍ରତିଛବି ପରିଦୃଷ୍ଟ ହୁଏ। ଯେଉଁ ରାଜନୈତିକ ଦାର୍ଶନିକ ମାନେ ତାଙ୍କ ଉପରେ ପ୍ରଭାବ ବିସ୍ତାର କରିଥିଲେ ସେମାନଙ୍କ ମଧ୍ୟରୁ ପ୍ଲାଟୋ, ଗ୍ରୀକ ଦାର୍ଶନିକ, ଗ୍ରୀକ ଫିଲୋସଫର, ପଲିଟିକାଲ ଫିଲୋସଫର ପ୍ଲାଟୋ, ଫାଦର ଅଫ ପଲିଟିକାଲ ସାଇନ୍ସ ଆରିଷ୍ଟୋଟଲ ଆଦି ଅନ୍ୟତମ। The deep impact of these Greek literature of Plato and Aristotle gave him an enthusiasm for horticulture which remained with him when other enthusiasm had died away. Hegel ହ୍ୟୁମଙ୍କର ପ୍ରାକୃତିକ ଆଇନ ନ୍ୟାଚୁରାଲ ଲ, ରୁସୋଙ୍କର ରୋମାଣ୍ଟିକ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତି ରୋମାଣ୍ଟିକ ଇଣ୍ଡିଭିଜୁଆଲ ଏବଂ ଇମାନୁଏଲ କାଣ୍ଟଙ୍କର ସାଇନ୍ସ ଆଣ୍ଡ ମୋରାଲିଟି ସମ୍ପର୍କରେ ଗଭୀର ଅଧ୍ୟୟନ କରି ଏହି ସବୁ ତତ୍ତ୍ୱର ଏକ ସମନ୍ୱୟ ପ୍ରତିଷ୍ଠା କରିଥିଲେ। ରୁସୋଙ୍କର ପ୍ରଭାବ ତାଙ୍କ ଉପରେ ଥିଲା, କାଣ୍ଟଙ୍କର ପ୍ରଭାବ ଥିଲା ଇମାନୁଏଲ କାଣ୍ଟଙ୍କର। ତେଣୁ ହିଗେଲଙ୍କର ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ତତ୍କାଳୀନ ପରିସ୍ଥିତି ଦ୍ୱାରା ଯେତିକି ପ୍ରଭାବିତ ହୋଇଥିଲା ତତୋଧିକ ପ୍ରଭାବିତ ହୋଇଥିଲେ ବହୁ ମହାରଥୀ, ରାଜନୈତିକ ମହାରଥୀ, ଦାର୍ଶନିକ ମହାରଥୀଙ୍କ ଦ୍ୱାରା। ତାଙ୍କର ରାଇଟିଂସ୍, Hegel's writings, he had 4 writings to his credit. One is Science of Logic of 3 volumes published on 1816, The Philosophy of Right published on 1821, The Philosophy of History published on 1837, The Phenomenology of Spirit 1807. Hegel was the champion of German idealism. Hegel borrowed his dialectical method from Socrates. So the ancestry of Hegelian doctrine of dialectical idealism can be traced back to these 2 great Greek thinkers of the past. One can also discern some influence of Aristotle's teleology on Hegel. Teleology, what is teleology? Teleology is a theory of knowledge according to which a thing is understood in terms of its end or purpose. Hegel's philosophy was historicist in nature. Historicism is a doctrine, matavada, which is variously understood by different thinkers. In its most general sense, it is rooted in the assumption that there are limits to scientific knowledge about human activities and achievements, and such inadequate scientific knowledge cannot be used as a means for controlling the future course of events. Contrary to this, historicism is linked to ambitions for subjecting all human happenings to rational control. Hegel's political philosophy is necessary because he borrowed many of his ideas from Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Kant, and Rousseau. He used them to evolve his own philosophy. He assimilated their ideas on his logical system. In other words, the Hegelian political philosophy stands apart from each of them. Idealism, Adarshavada, Hegelଙ୍କର Adarshavada. In the history of political ideas, there are two major schools of thought about the nature of reality. One is idealism, another is naturalism. Rationalism and empiricism, two major schools. One is idealism and naturality. Another is rationalism and empiricism. The question about that nature of reality is ontological, while the question about knowing it is epistemological. According to the idealist school, of which Hegel is a major proponent, the other one being Plato, true knowledge of everything in the world, material and non-material, is deduced from idea of the thing. In other words, the idea of the thing is more important than the thing itself. Thing and idea, out of two, idea is more important as per Hegel. ଜର୍ମାନୀର ମହାନ ଆଦର୍ଶବାଦୀ ଚିନ୍ତାନାୟକ ହିଗେଲ ବିଶେଷ ଭାବରେ ଗ୍ରୀକ ଦାର୍ଶନିକ ପ୍ଲାଟୋ ଆରିଷ୍ଟୋଟଲଙ୍କ ଦ୍ୱାରା ପ୍ରଭାବିତ ହୋଇଥିଲେ। ଏହା ବ୍ୟତୀତ ସେ ଭିକୋ ମଣ୍ଟେସ୍କ୍ୟୁଙ୍କର ଦ୍ୱାରା ମଧ୍ୟ କିଛି ପରିମାଣରେ ପ୍ରଭାବିତ ହୋଇଥିଲେ। ଦ୍ୱନ୍ଦାତ୍ମକ ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ଆଇଡିଆଲିଜିମ୍, ଦ୍ୱନ୍ଦାତ୍ମକ ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ଆଇଡିଆଲିଜିମ୍ ତାଙ୍କର ସର୍ବୋତ୍ତମ ଚିନ୍ତନ ଭାବରେ ରାଜନୈତିକ ଦର୍ଶନରେ ସ୍ଥାନ ପାଇଛି। ଗ୍ରୀକ ଦାର୍ଶନିକ ମାନେ ମତବ୍ୟକ୍ତ କରିଥିଲେ ଯେ ପ୍ରତ୍ୟେକ ଶକ୍ତି ଗୋଟିଏ ବିରୋଧୀ ଶକ୍ତିକୁ ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରେ। ପ୍ରତ୍ୟେକ ଶକ୍ତି ଗୋଟିଏ ବିରୋଧୀ ଶକ୍ତିକୁ ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରେ। Hegel's idealism, which is often called absolute idealism, sees a certain relationship between the subject and the object. It is a relationship between the subject and the object. It is a relationship between a knowing subject and the objective world, which is known, that is a relationship between mind and the world. Hegel's political philosophies rests mainly on his dialectical method. Dvandva, dialectic means dvandva. Hegel has himself expressed his debt to Socrates for this method. Hegel argued that absolute idea or the spirit in search of self-realization moves from being to non-being to becoming. An idea moves from a thesis to antithesis. Thesis first then becomes antithesis, then ultimately comes synthesis. Synthesis has in it elements of thesis as well as synthesis. It is a cyclic process. In due course of synthesis itself acquires the status of thesis and gives rise to its own antithesis. This is a cyclic process. So his method is called as dialectical idealism. अर्थात तांकर मतरे दुईटी विपरीत धर्म चिंताधारा मध्य संघर्ष जो नूतन धारणा थेसिस मीन्स धारणा जन्म निये दुईटी विपरीत धर्मी चिंताधारा मन भितर दुईटी विपरीत धर्मी चिंताधारा को से द्वंद्व बोली कहते गोटे चिंताधारा होची थेसिस चिंताधारा बा धारणा होची थेसिस थेसिस अर्थ धारणा तांक मत गोटे थेसिस मन को आसिला बेले तार विपरीत थेसिस बा धारणा मध्य मन को आसे दैट इज कॉल्ड एंटीथेसिस थेसिस आसे धारणा आसे एवं ता सहित एंटीथेसिस आसे एवं ये दुईटी धारणा मध्य जो प्रक्रिया मन भितर सृष्टि हुए ताकू द्वंद्व बोली द्वंद्वात्मक प्रक्रिया डायलेक्टिक बोली कहा जाए से कहती जे केवल तार्किक जुक्तिर महत्व वृद्धि करने द्वंद्ववादर उद्देश्य नुहे बरं यह एपरि एक माध्यम जहा द्वारा पृथ्वीर प्राय समस्त चिंताधारार वास्तव रूपायन करा जाई पारिबो ए विश्व ब्रह्मांड रे धारणा बा चिंताधारा आइडिया होची एकमात्र सत्य ट्रूथ तांक मतरे सत्य होची आइडिया बा धारणा बा चिंताधारा विश्वर सबु किछि पार्थिव जिनिस बा स्पिरिट एवं विवेक रिजिन सबु किछि ए दीटा जिनिस को नै सृष्टि होता का गोटे होची स्पिरिट आ गोटे रिजिन ए दीटा जाकर मिश्रण रे सबु पार्थिव जिनिस सृष्टि होता है एवं सोल होची सर्वशक्तिमान सेथुर आत्म संयम सृष्टि हुए आत्म अनुभूति रु धारणा करबा को हेले आत्मा ही सबु उपाय रे नियोजित होता है डायलेक्टिकल प्रोसेस द्वंद्वात्मक एक सरल प्रक्रिया होई नथिबारु हेगेल याकू विशद भाव रे व्याख्या करिसेंती आत्मार रहस्य को सरल तथा स्पष्ट भाव रे उपस्थापन करबा कष्टकर जदिओ समस्त अनुभव याकू करंती तेणु प्रथमे आत्म तत्व आभास बा पक्ष बा थेसिस सृष्टि हुए समयानुक्रमे प्रतिरोधर सम्मुखीन हुए जाकू प्रतिपक्ष बा एंटीथेसिस बोली कहा जाए गोटे तत्व तार विपरीत धर्मी तत्वर मिश्रण रे जो समन्वय तत्व सृष्टि हुए ताकू सिंथेसिस बोली कहा जाए ए सिंथेसिस होची गोटे सिद्धांत बा डॉक्ट्रिन व्यक्तिवाद इंडिविजुअलिज्म समाजवाद सोशलिज्म परस्पर विपरीत धर्मी आदर्शवाद रो समन्वय फल रे सृष्टि होइतिला वेलफेयर स्टेट बा जनमंगल राष्ट्र अर्थात the synthesis is in course of time becomes thesis again then comes again antithesis it is a cyclic process it never ends at any point of time it is a cyclic process it is a continuous process thesis antithesis synthesis then synthesis become thesis so that पक्ष प्रतिपक्ष एवं समन्वय सिंथेसिस ये होची गोटे धारावाहिक प्रक्रिया यूज ऑफ डायलेक्टिकल मेथड Hegel argues that A phenomenon can be best understood according to the law of dialectics, that is, when contrasted with its opposite. Pleasure is the best understood in opposition. Pleasure is the best understood in opposition to pain, heat in opposition to cold, goodness in opposition to badness, justice in opposition to injustice, and so on. Hegel has given several instances of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. The, there are number of instances. We can say family is the thesis, civil society is its antithesis, and state is the synthesis. Instances of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. पक्ष प्रतिपक्ष एवं समन्वय फैमिली टाको आम एग्जांपल भाव नहीं परिया फैमिली टाको जदि आम थेसिस कहबा तांको मतरे हिगेल को मतरे सिविल सोसाइटी होची एंटीथेसिस एंड स्टेट इज द thesis. Similarly, despotism is thesis, democracy is antithesis, constitutional monarchy is synthesis. Inorganic world, another instance of thesis. Inorganic world is the thesis, organic world is its antithesis, and human beings are the synthesis. Hegel believed that the true nature of thing can be known only if its contradictions are also known. In this sense, his theory of dialectics is rooted in contradiction or negation. He considered contradictions as the driving force of the whole process of evolution. This is the fundamental law of the cosmos, as also of thought. Then philosophy of history. Hegel's philosophy of history holds that the whole course of history is predetermined course. The human intervention or human effort can be effective only if it falls in line with the dialectical direction of the world history. Like the Stoic God, history leads the wise mole and drags the fool. Hegel's philosophy of history is contained in the lecture that he delivered while he was at the Berlin University. The Hegel argues that family symbolizes unity, civil society symbolizes particularly, and the state symbolizes universality. The unity of family, particularly of the civil society, is realized with the appearance of the state as the actuality of the universal order. Both the family and civil society are to some degree rational, but only the state is perfectly rational and perfectly ethical. In short, the evolutionary process passes through the following stages, and each successive stage is a distinctive improvement on the predecessor stage. First is inorganic wood, then inorganic world, then organic world, human beings, family, civil society, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's that Hegel tried to solve the basic problem about the relationship between matter and spirit He did so by arguing that matter is only a manifestation of spirit in its crude form. Matter is not only a negation of spirit, but also the conscious realization of spirit. The second important dimension of Hegel's philosophy of history is the doctrine of historicism. Broadly speaking, historicism is a doctrine which holds that whole course of history is predetermined course. The third major dimension of Hegel's philosophy of history is the use of Aristotelian teleology. Hegel's philosophy of history is that there is philosophical as against empirical history. History, as Hegel says, exhibits the developments of the consciousness of freedom on the part of spirit. Hegel actually applies his philosophy of history when he says that in the Oriental world there was despotism and slavery, and freedom was confined only to the monarch. In Greek and Roman civilizations, although slavery was there, yet the citizens enjoyed freedom. In Europe, particularly in Germany, there is emphasis on liberty for all, and infinite worth of each individual is recognized. The world history thus consists of definite stages of progression. One is Oriental, then is Greek, then is Roman and Germanic. Hegel's philosophy of history consists of two parts: the general pattern, the various stages. Second is the various stages in this general pattern. Hegel's philosophy of history talks of doctrine of moving forces in historical change. He argues that regime's great design can be carried out with the help of human passions. Regarding the theory of state, Hegel's contribution is much more like Plato. Hegel is a great system builder. Like Plato, Hegel is a great system builder. His theory of state is rooted in the axiom: what is rational is real, and what is real is rational. It means that whatever exists in the world is according to reason, and whatever is according to reason exists. Hegel's theory of state is based on basic premise about the gradual upholding of reason or spirit or absolute idea through a dialectic process. Reason gets its perfect realization in the state. Thus, the state is reason personified, state is rational, state is real. Therefore, what is rational is also real. Here, real does not only mean that which is empirical, but that which is fundamental. Hegel distinguishes between real and that which merely exists. That which merely exists is only momentary and a main surface manifestation of underlying forces, which alone are real. Hegel sought to bridge the gap between rational and the real. The real is nothing but the objective manifestation of the spirit. Hegel राष्ट्र को एक दैव अनुष्ठान डिवाइन इंस्टीट्यूशन भाବରେ वर्णना କରିବା ସହିତ ଏହାକୁ ଈଶ୍ୱରଙ୍କର ପୃଥିବୀରେ ପରିଭ୍ରମଣର ସ୍ଥାନ ବୋଲି ଅଭିହିତ କରିଛନ୍ତି. He says, state is the handiwork of God and an embodiment of reason. अर्थात राष्ट्र ईश्वरଙ୍କ ହାତ ତିଆରି ଏକ ଅନୁଷ୍ଠାନ एवं विवेकर मूर्तिमंत प्रतीक अटे। राष्ट्र व्यक्तिर विकास पाई सर्वश्रेष्ठ अनुष्ठान अटे एवं निजे निजर लक्ष्य पूरण करिथाय। राष्ट्र एक नैतिक अनुष्ठान अटे एवं व्यक्तिर नैतिकतार अभिवृद्धि पे प्रचेष्टा करिथाय। हिगेल को मतरे राष्ट्र एक वास्तव विवेक अनुष्ठान अटे एवं मनुष्य यार अंश भाव नैतिकतार मूर्तिमंत प्रतीक अटे। व्यक्ति केवल निजर सार्वभौम गुणर विकास न करी राष्ट्र कार्य को विश्वास सहित समापन करने आवश्यक। द स्टेट as perfect rationality in the sense that man has ethical status only as a member of state, and that highest duty of man is not to develop his individual faculties but to be a member of the state and faithfully fulfill his allotted functions therein. राष्ट्र उत्पत्ति आउ विकास उपरे तांकर मत दे से कहचंती जे विश्वर मुख्य आधार हेउची चेतना बा विवेक, जहा कि सर्वशेष सोपान रे उपनीत हेबा निमंते द्वंद्वात्मक पद्धतिर साहाय्य निये। मनुष्य हेउची सृष्टिर एकमात्र सृष्टि जहार रिजिन बा विवेक रही, जहा कह रैशनैलिटी। सही कारण मनुष्य को अन्यान्य समस्त जीव ठारू पार्थक्य बोली विवेचना करा जाए। हिगेल को मतरे परिवार हेउची प्रथम सामाजिक अनुष्ठान। फैमिली इज द फर्स्ट एवर इंस्टीट्यूशन ऑफ सोसाइटी, जे कि परिवार विवेक अनुमोदित हुए, विवेक द्वारा परिचालित हुए। समस्तंकर आवश्यकता पूर्ण करिवारे असमर्थ हेबारु मनुष्य याको परित्याग करी एक बुर्जुआ समाज प्रतिष्ठा निमंते व्यवस्था कला। समयानुक्रमे फैमिली को थेसिस को आगला एवं तार एंटीथेसिस हैला सिविल सोसाइटी, देन स्टेट इज दी सिंथेसिस। परिवार एवं सिविल सोसाइटी समन्वय रे राष्ट्र सृष्टि हला। राष्ट्र उभयर ध्वंस साधन न करी फैमिली और सिविल सोसाइटी ध्वंस साधन न करी बरं उभयर गुण रे समन्वय भावे सृष्टि होई उभयंकर मंगल पय कार्य करिया उचित। तेणु वेपर कहिचन जे हिगेलंकर समस्त गुरुत्वपूर्ण विषय उपरे भित्तिरे राष्ट्रर गठन चित्र परिष्कार अटे। In all essential, his is the most complete organic view of the state. It is a natural growth. Regarding theory of freedom of individual, regarding theory of freedom of individual, Hegel position, Hegel says that freedom is the freedom of the individual lies in the complete obedience of the laws of the state. Hegel संपूर्ण भाव रे क्लियर मत उपस्थापन करचंती स्वाधीनता कहा को कहा जाए। फ्रीडम कहले complete obedience of the laws of the state को फ्रीडम बोली कहा जाए। It is only as an obedient citizen with the universal who follows the laws of the state. In other words, state is a super organism in which no one has any individual preferences different from those of the larger unit. One aspect of Hegel's philosophy which is of the greatest significance is the exaltation of the state and complete negation of the individual's rights and freedoms. Real freedom of the individual can be realized only in the state. The only way for the individual to be free is to willingly obey the laws of the state. रूसों दर्शन रे हिगेल प्रभावित होती इंडिविजुअल फ्रीडम आउ लिबर्टी संपर्क में धारणा देवाई दर्शन रे कांटर प्रभाव मध्य अनुभूत होती स्वाधीनता तांको मतरे स्वाधीनता एक गुणात्मक लक्ष्य अटे यह बिना व्यक्तिर स्वतंत्र और मर्यादा खंडित होता है स्वाधीनता एवं सामाजिक जीवन व्यक्ति ग्रहणीय तथा आवश्यक उपादान अटे राष्ट्र को सर्वमान्य एवं सर्वशक्तिमान अनुष्ठान भाव में परिकल्पना करी हिगेल कहिसेंती ए प्रकार राष्ट्र रे नागरिक माने प्रकृत स्वाधीनता उपभोग करंती हिगेल तांको दर्शन रे मुख्य आधार भावरे स्वाधीनता बा फ्रीडम को से गुरुत्व देइचंती से स्वाधीनता एवं प्रभुत्व मध्य रे एक अभूतपूर्व समन्वय सृष्टि करिसेंती मनुष्य जेतेबेले राष्ट्रर आदेश मानि चले से सेतेबेले मुक्त बोली घोषणा होई था करा जाई था फ्रीडम in Rousseau's philosophy means subordination of actual will to the real will, general will. Individual will, the subordination of individual will to the will of the people or the general will is the freedom according to Rousseau. But according to Hegel, the willingly obey the laws of the state means freedom. तांकर हिगेल मतरे to renounce one's freedom is to renounce one's humanity, not to be free therefore is a renunciation of one's human rights and even of one's duties. The truth Hegel gathered from Rousseau and Kant. स्वाधीनता अर्थ तांको मतरे राष्ट्र प्रति सम्मान राष्ट्र आईन को मानिबा यह होची किंतु राष्ट्र नियंत्रण बिना स्वाधीनता उपभोग करथवा व्यक्ति स्वेच्छाचारी पार्श्व देवता होई पाए बोली से कहंती मींस हिज इंडिविजुअल फ्रीडम इज रेगुलेटेड फ्रीडम फ्रॉम सोशल फेनोमेना Hegel is undoubtedly one of the greatest political thinkers of modern times. He is considered to be a pragmatic thinker because he tries to idealize and rationalize the actual existing Prussian state. With a pronounced ecocentrism in the background of the Protestant Revolution, he was convinced that Germany in particular and Europe in general have approached the near final form of historical revolution. Hegel's greatest contribution was a new discipline, the philosophy of history, a method of measuring historical evolution with a confidence of inevitable progression. The classical tradition ended with Hegel. And new fundamental innovations have been possible after him. This is reflected by the fact that after Hegel began a period of refinement in political theory, Hegel's influence continues to be an important ingredient in contemporary political philosophy. It is all about Hegel's philosophy, political philosophy, his Hegel डायलेक्टिक द्वंद्वात्मक धारणा गुरुत्वपूर्ण किंतु तथ्यात्मक दृष्टिकोण रु भ्रमात्मक बोली विवेचना करा जाए। डायलेक्टिक इतिहास जो तथ्य दि जाइछि ताहा संदेह मुक्त नुहे। प्रोफेसर साबाइन कहती हिगेलंकर डायलेक्टिक एक तर्क सिद्ध नियम किंतु एगुड़िक जीवन द्वंद्व मान समाधान करती नाही। द्वंद्वात्मक तथ्यर रूप बदलाइले यह वास्तव पक्षे समाज पक्षे एते हितकार हुए नाही। Hegel's views on constitution that like thesis, antithesis and synthesis, he is in favor of constitutional monarchy, and Hegel has contributed in this way a lot to the history of political philosophy to build political science into a new realm. Next, it is all about Hegel. Next and last unit is unit 15. Unit 15, it is about Karl Heinrich Marx, popularly known as Karl Marx, popularly known as Marx, the most revolutionary, a legendary revolutionary political philosopher of the world. Karl Heinrich Marx, born on 1818 AD and breathed his last on 1883, a revolutionary German political philosopher and the father of scientific socialism, or popularly known as communism, साम्यवादर सृष्टिकर्ता कार्ल मार्क्स। वेपर तांको संपर्क रे कहती प्रोफेसर वेपर, फॉर द पावर ऑफ द मैसेज, फॉर द इंस्पिरेशन ऑफ हिज टीचिंग and for his effect upon future development. Marx can be sure of his place in any collection of the world's greatest masters of political thought. Marx can be sure of his place in any collection of the world's greatest masters of political thought. According to Professor Charan, Karl Heinrich Marx is the master of masters of political thought. You know, he is a German political philosopher. Marx was born at Trier in Rhineland, Prussia, in a Jewish family. He embraced Christianity during his childhood. He studied history, law, and philosophy at Bonn, Berlin, and Jena University. He received his doctorate, PhD degree in philosophy from the University of Jena. It was during his student days he was attacked to socialism, a doctrine which was considered quite dangerous by the rulers of those times. Because of his socialistic convictions and his radical anti-state views, he was expelled from Prussia and was forced to take shelter in France and Belgium. ରୁଷିଆରୁ ତାଙ୍କୁ ବିତାଡ଼ିତ କରିଦିଆଯାଇଥିଲା ତାଙ୍କର ବୈପ୍ଳବିକ ଲେଖା ପ୍ରକାଶ ପାଇଁ ତାଙ୍କର ଶିକ୍ଷାର୍ଥୀ ଜୀବନ ସମୟରେ, ଏବଂ ସେ ଫ୍ରାନ୍ସକୁ ପଳାୟନ କରିଥିଲେ ଏବଂ କିଛି ସମୟ ବେଲଜିୟମରେ ଅବସ୍ଥାନ କରିଥିଲେ। While he was in France, he continued organizing German workers working in that country. Consequently, the French government, under the pressure of the Prussian government, expelled him from France. In 1849, he migrated to England and stayed there till his death in 1883. 1849 मसीहा ठारू जीवनर शेष निश्वास 1883 मसीहा पर्यंत से इंग्लैंड अवस्थान करी इंग्लैंड प्रसिद्ध लाइब्रेरी रे अध्ययन करी एक नूतन राजनैतिक आदर्शवादर प्रतिष्ठा करथिले जहाँकि तांको विश्व इतिहास रे अमर करी रखिछि। Marx has written so extensively on various issues of philosophy, economics, politics, and society. Because of a wide range of issues on which he wrote, it is equally difficult to put him in a straight jacket of any one of discipline. During his student days, Marx was attracted to Hegelian idealism, but he soon shifted his interest to humanism and ultimately to scientific socialism. He was also influenced by some of his major movements of his time during his formative years. The idea of evolution in one form or other was very much in the air. Was very much in the air. He had published as many as 9 works to his credit. All these works are famous among academicians, political students of political science, political philosophers, intellectuals. These are the most famous, the Communist Manifesto published on 1848. Secondly, Das Kapital published on 1867. Third, The Poverty of Philosophy, 1847. A contribution to the critique of political economy published on 1859. 11th thesis on Feuerbach, 1845. The 18th Weimar of Louis Bonaparte, 1894. Civil War and Class Struggle in France, 1849. 8. The Critique of the Goethe Program, 1891. 9. Revolution and Counter-Revolution. Karl Marx जड़े वैप्लविक राजनैतिक दार्शनिक थे। 1948 मसीह से एंजेल्स सहित मिसी दि कम्युनिस्ट मैनिफेस्टो पुस्तक रचना करथिले जहाकू कम्युनिज्म बा साइंटिफिक सोशलिज्म रो बाइबल बोली कहा जाए। से 1827 मसीह रे तीनोटी भाग रे दास कैपिटल रचना करथिले एवं एही पुस्तकर दृश्यमान आंतर्जातिक समाजवाद इतिहास रे एक गुरुत्वपूर्ण घटना भाव रे परिगणित हुए। दि कम्युनिस्ट मैनिफेस्टो 1848 मसीह रे पब्लिकेशन साम्यवाद रो इस्ताहार एथरे तांकर दर्शन से पुस्तिकार प्रथम धाड़ी ही तांकर परिचय मिलता है। से लिखिचंती द हिस्ट्री ऑफ ऑल हिदरटो एक्जिस्टिंग सोसाइटी। द हिस्ट्री ऑफ ऑल हिदरटो एक्जिस्टिंग सोसाइटी इज द हिस्ट्री ऑफ क्लास स्ट्रगल। ए पर्यंत विद्यमान होइथिबा समस्त समाज रो इतिहास हेउची श्रेणी संघर्ष रो इतिहास, क्लास स्ट्रगल। rejecting Hegelian dialectical idealism. Marx offered dialectical materialism, emphasizing that the primacy of the mode of production of the material means of life essentially conditions the overall existence of human beings as manifested in human relationships. Marx borrowed his idea of alienation. Marx borrowed his idea of alienation from Hegel. For Hegel, alienation is the state of consciousness emancipates itself from this alienation by recognizing that the objects that appear to consciousness to exist outside are only a phenomenal expression of consciousness. In other words, it is recognition by consciousness that objects are merely alienated. Marx alienation is related to the real existing objects, and can be overcome in the real sphere of object related activities. Punjivada, Marx has described the human history, human society is a class society. It has 5 stages. In the primitive society, there was communism. In the primitive society, first is primitive society. Primitive society was characterized with communism. समस्ते से सोसाइटी समान थिले कोनोसी श्रेणी नथिला पार्थक्य नथिला because man was nomadic by then जाजाबर जीवन यापन करथला मनुष्य से समय रे किंतु कहारी प्रति शोषण रो चिन्ह बन नथिला then the ancient society was characterized with the slavery class and master class. Then the society, firstly, in the ancient period, divided into 2 classes. One is master class, another is slavery class. In the medieval society, there was also the class in different name with same character, different name but with same character. The owner class, the exploited class. Owner class is feudal class, जमीदार माने जो माने से समयटा थिला agrarian society, कृषि भित्तिक समाज, चाष जमीर मालिक श्रेणी को कहा जाउतला जमीदार श्रेणी एवं रयत श्रेणी बा कृषि जमी उपरे मालिकाना नथिबा श्रेणी को कहा जाउतला सर्वहारा श्रेणी. Another phase of society became modern society. There was capitalism and labor class. A class divided into 2. One is capital, another is labor class. And next society is communism, a communist society. Karl Marx borrowed his method of dialectic from Hegel and modified it in a fundamental way. While Hegel has applied his dialectical method in the domain of ideas, Marx applied the dialectic to explain the material conditions of life. मेटेरियल कंडीशन डायलेक्ट्रिकल द्वंद्वात्मक धारणा द्वंद्वात्मक प्रणाली हिगेल ठारू मार्क्स जदियो ग्रहण करिसेंती किंतु ताकू भिन्न बाटे कार्ल मार्क्स कहती जे हिगेल मुंड उपरे छिड़ा होते उल्टे गोड़ उपरे छिड़ा करदेली अर्थात मार्क्स has never accepted Hegelian views of ideas as the basis of dialectical method. Marx accepts material conditions of life is the basis of dialectics বা দ্বন্দ্বাত্মক ধারণা dialectics the law of transformation of quantity into quality. It means that quantitative changes lead to quantitative revolutionary situation. The law of unity of opposites, contradiction. The law of negation, thesis and synthesis. Marx holds that material and the ideal are not only different but opposite and constitute a unity in which the material is primary and mind or idea is secondary. Material is primary and mind is secondary. This is so because matter can exist without mind. Matter can exist without mind, but mind cannot exist without matter. Matter can exist without mind, but mind cannot exist without matter because historically mind has developed out of matter. In this way, Marx completely inverted the Hegelian position. Hegel accepted mind was primary and matter was secondary. Marx pointed out that Hegel's dialectics is standing on its head. Hegel's dialectics is standing on head. Hegel mundo par chidaitle. It must be turned right side up. This he did by making matter primary and mind secondary. The difference between Hegel and Karl Marx. मार्क्सवाद बा वैज्ञानिक समाजवादर समग्र तत्व तर्क संगत वस्तुवाद डायलेक्टिकल मेटेरियलिज्म उपरे आधारित विवादीय वस्तुवाद अथवा द्वंद्वमूलक वस्तुवाद बोली कहा जाई था। हिगेल दर्शाई थिले जे चिंताधारा बा आइडिया भाव बा स्पिरिट होची चरम वास्तवता एवं वास्तव दुनियार स्रष्टा किए से आइडिया और स्पिरिट अर्थात वास्तव दुनिया होची चिंताधारार बाह्य प्रकाश। चिंताधारा होची मूल आधार जहाँ को भित्ति करी तर्क संगत प्रक्रिया रे दुनियार समस्त परिवर्तन बा विकास घटाई चलछि। तर्क संगत प्रक्रिया रे चिंताधारा मानकर संघर्ष घटी नूतन तथा अधिक विकसित अवस्था सृष्टि होई था। नूतन व्यवस्थित विकास सृष्टि होता है एवं राष्ट्र रूपक सर्वोच्च सोपान रे उपनीत हेबा पर्यंत यह प्रक्रिया चली रही कथा हिगेल थेसिस एंटीथेसिस सिंथेसिस बोली कहिसंती। मार्क्स किंतु ताकू मूल जिनिस को ग्रहण करिसंती किंतु ताको चिंताधारा बा आदर्श को मुख्य चालक भाव में स्वीकार करी नाहंती। मार्क्स को मतरे वास्तव दुनियार परिवर्तन बा विकास केंद्र बिंदु बा मुख्य चालक होची वस्तु बा मैटर। तांको मतरे हिगेल मुंडो ऊपर छिड़ा होइतले से तांको उल्टाई गोड़ पिड़ा। तेणु चिंताधारा परिवर्ते वस्तु को पक्ष बोली कहा जाए बा थेसिस बोली कहा जाए। जहाँ तर्क संगत प्रक्रिया रे बा द्वंद्वात्मक प्रक्रिया रे परस्पर विरोधी चिंता चेतन कर्षण प्रक्रिया रे सेटा एंटीथेसिस होता है परवर्ती समय सेटा सिंथेसिस होता है यह तर्क संगत वस्तुवाद बोली कहा जाए मैटर को बेस करी तर्क संगत वस्तुवाद प्रस्तुत करिसेंती कार्ल मार्क्स you know Karl Marx has presented the revolutionary socialism that is known as communism. It has as many as 9 features. His communism, the communism of Karl Marx is endowed with 9 features. First one is dialectical materialism. Second feature of Karl Marx communism is historical materialism or economic interpretation of history. Third one is surplus value. Fourth one is class struggle. Fifth one is revolution. Sixth one is destruction of capitalism. Seventh one is dictatorship of proletariats. Eighth one is withering away of the state, and ninth one is classless society. These are the 9 ever features of communism or scientific socialism as presented by Karl Marx. We have discussed the dialectical materialism of Karl Marx. Then we shall study the historical materialism. तर्क संगत वस्तुवाद बा इतिहास अर्थनैतिक व्याख्या से प्रारंभ कहते कार्ल मार्क्स प्रारंभ कहते ए पर्यंत कौथे कहते ना तांकर कम्युनिस्ट मैनिफेस्टो रे कहते ए पर्यंत विद्यमान थिबा मानव समाजर इतिहास होउची सदा सर्वदा वस्तुगत लड़ाईर इतिहास अर्थात अन्यान्य विषय अपेक्षा अर्थनैतिक शक्ति गुड़ी को समाज रे सर्वाधिक प्रभावित करिथिबा वस्तु विषय बोली से कहती अर्थनीति होची समाजर भित्ति संरचना से स्ट्रक्चर और सुपर स्ट्रक्चर समाजर दुईटी सोपान थिबा कथा कहती गोटे होची स्ट्रक्चर अनदर इज सुपर स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ द सोसाइटी इज इकोनॉमिक foundation that constitutes the relations of production and is the real foundation of the society. समाजर भित्ति संरचना होची अर्थनैतिक वस्तु अर्थनीति होची समाजर भित्ति संरचना एवं ता उपरे दंडायमान इट इज द बेसिस ऑन व्हिच राइजेस ए लीगल एंड पॉलिटिकल सुपर स्ट्रक्चर to which correspond definite forms of social consciousness. Along with it, the society's relations of production themselves correspond to a definite stage of development of its material productive process. Thus, the mode of production is material, life determines the social, political and intellectual life. Process in general. अर्थात उत्पादन और विनिमयर स्वरूप सामाजिक और राजनैतिक व्यवस्थार ढांचा निरूपण करे मनीष माने सामाजिक उत्पादन माध्यम एक निर्दिष्ट अवसंभावी संपर्क मध्य प्रवेश करती जहाँ से इच्छार अधीन नुहे तांको मतरे वस्तु होची स्वयं धावमान, मनुष्य धावमान नुहे, मनुष्य गतिशील नुहे, वस्तु होची गतिशील एवं मनुष्य वस्तु को हासिल करिया पई तीव्र वेगरे वस्तु पछरे धावमान होता। से वस्तु को पाइबा पई मनुष्य अहरह उद्यम करे एवं वस्तु होची अर्थनीति होची समाजर भित्ति संरचना सबस्ट्रक्चर एंड ता ऊपर बेस करी मनुष्य जते बळे सर्वनिम्न मौलिक आवश्यकता पूरण हो जाए सेते बळे मनुष्य अन्यान्य आवश्यकता प्रति मनोनिवेश करिथाए यथा कला विज्ञान संस्कृति इत्यादि इत्यादि। दैट इज कॉल्ड द सुपर स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ द सोसाइटी। कला विज्ञान राजनीति संस्कृति एगुक होची समाजर सुपर स्ट्रक्चर एंड स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ द सोसाइटी होची भित्ति संरचना। मनुष्यर आवश्यकता उपादान समूह होची भित्ति संरचना। एवं याकू ही इतिहास लिपिबद्ध करिथिबा समाजर प्रत्येक स्तर, प्रथम स्तर होची प्रिमिटिव सोसाइटी, अनदर स्तर होची दासत्व समाज बा स्लावेरी, अनदर इज फ्यूडल, अनदर इज कैपिटलिस्ट एंड देन कम्युनिज्म प्रिवेल्स। इतिहास एई प्रत्येक समाज धनी निर्धन बा शोषक शोषित श्रेणी विभाजित समाजर स्वरूप को कार्ल मार्क्स देखैछन्ति। समाज रो दुईटी श्रेणी से अर्थनैतिक दृष्टिकोण ही निर्धारण करिथिबारु तेणु समाज को से आर्थिक समाज रे विभक्त करछन्ति। ओनरशिप क्लास बा धनिक श्रेणी आउ गोटे होची निर्धनी क्लास बा श्रमिक श्रेणी। सामाजिक स्तर अनुजाई समयर स्तर अनुजाई दास कुह बा जमी रयत कुह बा श्रमिक कुह एमाने सब होचंती सर्वहरा श्रेणी बा प्लोरिटोरिएट बोली कहंती। एवं एहाकु परिवर्तन करी एक श्रेणी विहीन समाज शोषणहीन साम्यवादी समाज समानवादी समाज रे परिणत करिवा होची वस्तुवादी एवं अर्थनैतिक शक्ति मानकर उत्पादन विनिमयर पुनर्विन्यास। एवं एही प्रोसेस रे इतिहासर परिवर्तन घटिची। दैट इज रिगार्डेड एज materialistic interpretation of history. Third feature is surplus value. Surplus value बा उद्वृत्त मूल्य। surplus value Karl Marx refers that the श्रमिक रो सम द्वारा कौन सी द्रव्य रो चाहिदा सृष्टि होता है। गोटे द्रव्य रो चाहिदा श्रमिक श्रम द्वारा सृष्टि होता है बा तार मूल्य सृष्टि होता है। तेणु श्रमिकर श्रमदान रे द्रव्यर मूल्य जहाँ निर्धारण होची ताकू श्रमिक पाइबा दरकार सबु मनते। मात्र गोटे द्रव्यर मूल्य श्रमिकर श्रम द्वारा निर्धारित होथवारु श्रमिकर से द्रव्यर मूल्य उपरे संपूर्ण हक अछि। मात्र बजार द्रव्यर बजार मूल्य रु सेही द्रव्य पाई श्रमिकर मजूरी बा मूल्य को बाद देले जो अवशिष्ट मूल्य रहुची बा जो बड़का मूल्य रहुची ताकू सरप्लस वैल्यू बा उद्वृत्त मूल्य बोली कहा जाउची। गोटे द्रव्यर मार्केट वैल्यू ऑफ ए गुड माइनस the labor wage of that value is called the surplus value, जहाकू श्रमिक पाइबा उचित, मात्र से सरप्लस वैल्यू को पुंजीपति मालिक शोषण माध्यम शोषण कर एक्सप्लॉयटेशन, so that the ownership class become rich to more rich, become richer and richest, whereas the labor class becomes poor to poorer and poorest. That is called the surplus value. So that classes are created. As a result, there becomes class war or class struggle. Class war or class struggle. Those who own the control of a means of production constitute the bourgeoisie, the exploiters class. मालिक श्रेणी को से शोषणकारी समाज बोली कहते। Those who own only labor power constitute the proletariat or exploited class. Because classes are defined by Marx on the basis of twin criteria of a person's place in the mode of production and his consequent position in terms of relation of product. The lack of ownership of a means of production and the lack of property and the immediate need to get work, the class of concrete labor are some of the characteristic features of food. Since a class is based on ownership of means of production and ownership of property, the disappearance of a class difference depends on the disappearance of property as the determining factor of status. So, the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. The history of class struggles. Marx argues that class conflict is the real driving force of human history. Class struggle is the main driving force of human history. In the capitalist societies, class differentiation is most clear, class consciousness is more developed, and class conflict is more acute. Thus, capitalism is the culminating point in the historical evolution of classes and class conflicts. The distinctive feature of a bourgeoisie epoch is the society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat. अर्थात इतिहास प्रत्येक पर्यायर प्रति समाज दुईटी श्रेणी रे विभक्त होची, गोटे होची धनी आ गोटे निर्धन, अन्य भाषा रे तांका भाषा रे मार्क्स भाषा रे शोषक आ गोटे होची शोषित। उदाहरण दबा को जाई कार्ल मार्क्स लिखिसंती स्वाधीन नागरिक ओ कृतदास, संभ्रांत रयत, भूस्वामी भूदास, बणिक संघर सदस्य और दिन मजुरा गोटे कथार अत्याचारी अत्याचारित परस्पर विरुद्ध रे ठिया होई आसुछन्ति, निरवच्छिन्न संग्राम रे लिप्त रहिसंति, केतेबेले प्रच्छन्न रे तो केतेबेले प्रकाश्य रे। जेउ संग्राम रो परिसमाप्ति होची समाज रो अबाध वैप्लविक परिवर्तन किंबा संग्राम रो श्रेणी मानकर समूह विनाश। सामंतवादी समाज पर पुंजीवादी समाज आविर्भाव है, जो पुंजीपति और सर्वहरा नामक दुई परस्पर विरोधी श्रेणी सृष्टि हेले। पुंजीपति श्रेणी किछि करंती नाही, मात्र सबु किछि नै जानती शोषण माध्यम रे। तेणु मालिकानाहीन श्रमिक एवं काम करुनथुवा मालिक मानक भितरे संघर्ष अनिवार्य होई उठे, जहा साम्यवादी श्रेणी विहीन समाज प्रतिष्ठार अंतर्गत। किभଳି संघर्ष हुए, दैट इज थियोरी ऑफ रिवोल्यूशन। श्रेणी संघर्षर चरम अवस्था हेउछि विप्लव. The basic cause of revolution, according to Marx, is the disjunction that arises between relations of production and means of production. ଯେତେବେଳେ ପୁଞ୍ଜିପତି ମାନଙ୍କର ଆଉ ଶୋଷଣ କରିବା ପାଇଁ କିଛି ବାକି ରହି ନଥାଏ, ସର୍ବହରା ସବୁ କିଛି ହରେଇଥିବା ଶ୍ରମିକ ଶ୍ରେଣୀ ମାନଙ୍କର ହରେଇବା ପାଇଁ ଆଉ କିଛି ରହି ନଥାଏ, ସେତେବେଳେ विप्लव देखा दिए, रिवोल्यूशन देखा दिए, श्रेणी संघर्ष सृष्टि हुए. ए विप्लव माध्यम रे असंख्य सर्वहरा एकत्र होई मुष्टिमय शोषक पुंजीपति माननकु हटाई देबाकू एवं राष्ट्रीय व्यवस्था को ध्वंस करबाकू उद्यम करन. कार्ल मार्क्स को मतरे स्टेट and its institutions, the administrative process, all are in favor of bourgeois शोषणकारी सपक्ष रे. तेणु राष्ट्रर विनाश आवश्यक करती से माने. पुंजीपति माने निजर वस्तुवादी और अर्थनैतिक प्रभाव द्वारा शासन कल, आईन, न्याय व्यवस्था, समाज इत्यादि सबु किछि निज नियंत्रण को नहीं शोषण कार्य व्यापक करता. तेणु पुंजीवादी मानकर सुरक्षा, प्रोत्साहनकारी राष्ट्रर विलय पाई मध्य विप्लवर आवश्यकता रही. तेणु मार्क्स आह्वान देते, वर्कर्स ऑफ द वर्ल्ड यूनाइट. हे विश्वर श्रमिक गण एकजुट हुआ. वर्कर्स ऑफ द वर्ल्ड बी यूनाइट. यू हैव नथिंग टू लूज एक्सेप्ट योर क्लास आइडेंटिटी. हे विश्वर श्रमिक गण, तुम्हें सबु किछि हरई सारिच, तुमर आ हरैबा को किछि नाही. गोटिए जिनिस हरैबा को अछि, दैट इज योर क्लास आइडेंटिटी. तुमर श्रेणी परिचय, तुम्हें सर्वहरा बोली जो परिचित हैच ताकू ही तुम्हें हरैबा को अछि. कम फॉरवर्ड and his means of revolution is violence. हिंसात्मक विप्लव माध्यम रे याकू हासिल कर. जाद्वारा कौन हुए? डिस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ कैपिटलिज्म, पूंजीवाद रो विनाश हुए. मार्क्सिज्म is otherwise known as scientific socialism because Karl Marx has presented such type of enumeration, description of society, his theory of state, class, in such a way that one feature, if you discuss, automatically another feature come into the discussion properly and cohesively. So that जेतबळे भଳି संघर्ष हुए, संघर्ष रो रिजल्ट होची पुंजीवाद रो विनाश घटिता एवं सर्वहरा मानकर एक छत्रवाद, डिक्टेटरशिप ऑफ प्रोलेटारिएट्स. This is revolutionary consciousness. The understanding of the existing reality by the proletariat is therefore necessary condition for the possibility of revolutionizing it. In other words, it is only an understanding of the internal dynamics of capitalism by the proletariat that will enable it to make revolution, which will signal the transition from capitalism to socialism or communism, where there is dictatorship of proletariat. Dictatorship of proletariat is another important concept of Marxist writing. Marx did not write very clearly and systematically about the dictatorship of proletariat, but about the exact nature of form of post-revolutionary communist society. At best, his treatment is sketchy. Thus, dictatorship of proletariat is a necessary immediate point or a transitional phase of on the path of capitalism to socialism and communism. Then withering away of the state. कार्ल मार्क्स राष्ट्र विलय कामना करती राष्ट्र को संपूर्ण भाव में विलय हवा उचित बोली मत पोषण करती कारण राष्ट्र होची शोषण एक माध्यम श्रेणी विभाजन एक माध्यम बा आयुध पुंजीपति मान हाथ में राष्ट्र शोषण अस्त्र भाव में व्यवहृत होता है श्रेणी विहीन समाज प्रतिष्ठार प्रतिबंधक राष्ट्र होता है तेणु सर्वहरार एक छत्रवाद प्रतिष्ठित होता बेले मध्य भी राष्ट्र तिष्ठि रही था सर्वशेष राष्ट्रर विलोप साधन आवश्यक पड़ता है राष्ट्रर विलोप साधन सह एक क्लासलेस सोसाइटी लास्ट फीचर ऑफ Marxism. A classless society is established where there is no owner, there is no labor, each man is equal in terms of his economic strength, economic status with other. And society owns every means of production and distribution and each man gets according to his need each according to his own need सबु संपत्ति सामूहिक मालिकाना रे थाए व्यक्तिगत प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी रो आदौ चिन्ह वर्ण न थाए कौन सी जिनिस व्यक्तिगत भाव रे नहीं राष्ट्र प्रत्येक मनुष्य को सेतिकी दब जेतिकी जने मनुष्यर आवश्यक थियो दैट इज कॉल्ड द क्लासलेस सोसाइटी जनरल क्रिटिसिज्म मार्क्सवाद तत्व एक जुगान्तकारी तथा वास्तववादी दर्शन रूपे बहु प्रसिद्ध लाभ करिछि किंतु बहु दोष भी रही इतिहास अर्थनैतिक व्याख्या भ्रमात्मक अटे कारण it evolution of history never exists exclusively on economic factors only. There are different factors that are responsible for evolution of history like geography, population, activities, ideology. These are श्रेणी विहीन समाज establishment of a classless society is a daydream which is not at all possible. So Marx, after all, Marx is undoubtedly one of the most influential political philosophers of modern times. His ideas have acquired the status of a powerful ideology. His ideas on alienation, historical materialism, class war, surplus value, his vision of a proletarian revolution, dictatorship of proletariat, socialism and communism have been extensively impact on the worldwide society, and it was due to his ideology, due to his presentation to mankind, his ideology, the great revolution that is called October Revolution in USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, in 1917 occurred, and in Russia there was the end of monarchy out of revolution by the under the leadership of a great leader, the Visishta Shramik Neta, the great labor union leader Lenin, the labor first ever the communist regime came into existence in 1917, and afterward 1/3 of the entire world countries accepted his ideology and enunciated the implemented the communist regime in their states, and still it exists. Such type of communist society, communist regime is still exists in China, Cuba, and so also in many countries. This is all about the political philosophy of Karl Friedrich Marx, and we have completed all the units from 1 to 15, and today we had completed from 12 to 15, 4 units, and the course is completed. And this time we shall go for the doubt clearing session. The students who have any doubt may ask for explanation. The learners may ask for their doubts to be cleared if you have any. Hello. Hello. The learners who have any doubt may ask. We shall clear it. We shall again understand it.
Sir, I think there is no doubt.
Sir.
So,
Sir.
so let us wind up, I think.
Sir.